you could pull up paragraph 384 of the foundation document. McNulty, before the lunch break, we had been looking at this paragraph, which shows that it was on August 22nd when BLT provided the budgets it had prepared for the arena and the pool. After Ms. Leonard forwards you the budgets, you reply to her and say, "I will soon have a budget for a second floor mezzanine lounge for the Steel Arena." What did you mean by that?
In looking at the budget information provided by WGD and that provided from Sprung, I recognize that there was a difference between the two, and the fact that the WGD arena had not included a second floor mezzanine and the associated things that would go with that.
And we saw earlier that the idea of a second floor was contemplated in the August 3rd design components that was sent to BLT. When WGD sent its numbers in on August 17th, was it discussed to your knowledge that at all the fact that those numbers didn't contemplate a second floor?
I don't remember any discussion.
So, but the BLT ones did to address that.
I was going to, using the information that I had, still come up with a comparison between the two options that would be an apples-to-apples comparison on the features.
And was this work you were intending to do yourself?
Yes.
Why not ask WGD to incorporate or advise at the cost of a second floor mezzanine within their budgets?
I think at this point in time, it was a matter of timing. The report was already late, and to go back to WGD to ask them to provide further information at that point wouldn't help the timeline.
Other than the timeline, is there any reason WGD, if it had more time, would have been able to prepare an estimate for a second floor mezzanine?
No, there's no other reason.
Go to paragraph 395 of the foundation document. This is the following day after BLT sends their budget numbers. You send Ms. Leonard an email at 9:30 in the morning, subject line arena and the pool, and you provide a spreadsheet titled ice and water cost comparisons. So if we could open up that attachment, which is TOC 203364. And then if we could make it so that the pre-engineered steel building box and the insulated fabric membrane structure box are on the screen. Thank you. So I take it this is an updated version of the spreadsheet we were looking at earlier. Is that fair?
Yes.
With respect to the pre-engineered steel building, as it looks to me, all of the numbers are the same, or at least, and in the cases where they're different, the percentages are the same, except there is now a just shy of $1 million figure for the second floor mezzanine lounge. Does that sound correct to you?
Yes.
How did you arrive back up. Is this the amount you calculated when you did the work to determine what it would cost to have a pre-engineered steel facility with a second floor?
I believe so.
And how did you arrive at that number?
Using the information that was in the sprung cost estimate, and understanding from a construction point of view what would be required to put a second floor mezzanine in. I used primarily the numbers out of the sprung estimate to adjust the WGD estimate so that the two estimates would include the same components.
When you say understanding from a construction point of view what would be required, are you referring to your personal experience with construction projects and facilities management?
Yes.
In coming to this number, did you consult with anyone else?
I don't believe so.
So you mentioned you took elements of the BLT or sprung costs that had been provided. Did you use anything else in coming up with that $995,000 figure?
There were some components that didn't exist in the sprung or BLT estimate, but those components were available in the WGD estimate. And so through a process of factoring the information that was in the WGD estimate, I could fill in the blanks with what was missing from the sprung estimate.
So it may assist if we go to further to the right of the spreadsheet, keep going, so you see there's some information to the right, and scroll down, keep scrolling. So we see that figure there, that's for the second floor mezzanine. Does the data above this represent the information you pulled from the sprung and WGD estimates in order to come to that $995,000 figure?
Yes.
Okay. So it appears in later emails that you send, if we could scroll up, that where there's a so looking at this chart to the right, in the first column on the left where there's number codes, where there's a number with a dash in it, that is referring to a line item in the BLT budgets. Is that correct?
Yes.
And where there is a number without a dash in it, that is referring to a line item in the WGD budget calculation. Is that correct?
Yes.
So for instance, the first three items are from the WGD budget?
Yes.
And then the next item, the second floor concrete, is from the BLT or sprung budget?
Yes.
Okay. If we look, there appears to be 4 items that were taken from the WGD budget and used to build your calculation. How did you decide what items to take?
The first 3 items essentially build the walls around the second floor mezzanine. And the item down further, exterior windows, would contemplate windows in the second floor.
Okay, so from the WG budget, you've taken the exterior windows for the second floor, and then I just want to make sure I understand, for the first 3, is this essentially to build the arena up an additional floor?
Correct.
If we could go to, I want to leave this document on the screen, the document I handed out before, which was TOC 02-01219. And I believe you still have a copy in front of you, Mr. McNulty. If not, let us know. This is a copy of the WGD's detailed budget, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if we go into the budget to the 1, 2, 4th page, we see that line item number 04220 with reference to masonry. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So, and within this line item, you've taken 3 of the items, the exterior architectural block, the block back up to above, and the cavity wall insulation with C. What does C/W stand for in your understanding?
Complete with.
With vapor barrier. It appears you haven't made any adjustments from what WGD estimated would be the cost of these items for the first floor when adding to a second floor. Is that fair?
Yes.
Why, in your mind, were no adjustments necessary?
Because we were adding essentially the same square footage of wall area for the second floor as what they would have already included for the first floor.
Had you had any experience before in determining what is involved in adding a second floor mezzanine to an arena or a similar component to a similar building?
Not directly.
And what do you mean by not directly?
I feel that I have enough experience to understand what would be required, and I could essentially draw the components that would go into that additional structure, and so that's why I felt I was capable of reflecting that in the estimate.
So was it the case that you understood that to add exterior architectural block to make a second floor, that would cost twice as much as to have that for a first floor building?
For those components, yes.
Okay, and what is it about the architectural block that made you believe that it would be twice as much?
It's a straight square footage calculation, so if you're doubling the square footage of the wall, you're doubling the cost.
Would it be possible that you wouldn't need to double the square footage of the wall? For instance, if the mezzanine was only part of the length of the building?
Well, that is my my assumption, and based on my understanding of WGD's estimate, is that it was a pre-inch style building from end to end, with the lobby and dressing room and those amenity areas enclosed in this architecturally featured part of the building. And so what I envisioned was that architecturally featured part of the building would be extended up to enclose the second floor.
So, and I just want to make sure I understand, when you're envisioning the building, you're envisioning a front area that is made of architectural block, and then the arena itself is made out of pre-engineered steel. And so the front area on the first floor has a lobby and change rooms, and that's with an architectural block?
Yes.
And then you're building up from that architectural block to create a second floor where there's a mezzanine?
Yes.
What's block back up to above?
the wall will still be a cavity type wall, and so on the inside there would be a block wall which essentially creates the interior space, and then there would be a wall cavity with a vapor barrier and insulation, and then the architectural block is essentially a face out in front of that.
So in this case, you also, it was your understanding that would require twice as much as what is contemplated when it comes to a single floor building?
Yes.
And similarly, what is the purpose of the cavity wall insulation with vapor barrier?
Those three components make up the wall, and so on the interior you have the backup block, and then there's a cavity, and in that cavity is the insulation and vapor barrier, and then on the exterior the architectural block. So those three components make up that wall.
So if we could go on to page 6, if we leave this on the screen, but page 6 of the WGD budget in front of you. Line item 8120, which is the exterior windows. Let me know when you have it in front of you.
Yes.
8120. The first item under this is punched windows 24. Is that the line item you're working off of when you have an exterior windows line item on the spreadsheet on the screen?
I would believe so.
And in that case, the total for the first floor was 72,000, and for the second floor you've put 10,000. How did you get those numbers? How did you arrive at the 10,000?
I think my approach was probably that the second floor wouldn't have perhaps as many windows as the first floor, because it would be an auditorium type space, and so it would be purely on what I perceived as the count of the windows.
So in this case, you expected there'd be significantly fewer windows.
Yes.
Okay, so those are the items you took from the the WGD cost breakdown. How did you decide what items you would take from the sprung cost breakdown?
By the description of what the item was. If that component was required or relative to the second floor, I would have considered it as something that needed to be in both estimates.
In the case of Sprung's budget, did you make any adjustments with respect to any of the line items?
I wouldn't know from looking at this. I would have to see the budget to the numbers in each place.
So maybe we'll take an example. If you look at painting, which is 9-912, and you have the number 10,268. If we could open up TOC 0202990. And if we could go, so this, Mr. McNulty, is the budget that BLT sent to Mr. Houghton on August 22nd for the arena. And if we can go to item 9-912, which is on page 3. So we see there's a line item on the screen that is painting. And in that case, for the BLT budget, The total cost is $30,805. Do you know how you got to reducing that amount for the second floor to $10,268?
Based on my estimate of the square footage of painting required. So if all I was, so in this budget, I would believe that painting references the entire building, not just the second floor mezzanine. So I factored that number down based on my understanding of what the square footage of a mezzanine would be.
And it looks to us that you made other adjustments along those lines. Does that sound correct to you?
Yes, I would have used that same rationale to make adjustments so that it was specific to the mezzanine. And the other thing that I see here is that there are numbers in this estimate for the total units, so the total square feet the total square feet and the unit cost per square foot. And so those would have helped me to arrive at an estimate that was relative to the mezzanine itself.
In your mind, why was it the case that this Sprung's numbers for what it would cost to build a second floor in a sprung structure would apply to a pre-engineered steel building?
Firstly, particularly the interior features of the mezzanine would be essentially the same physically in either case. Secondly, in my objective was to do that apples to apples comparison so that using the same dollar per square foot in each building made that a fair comparison and made it not subject to inflating one over the other.
Is the notion on that last point that if I'm comparing two buildings, if I make the same cost for the same items, that's essentially a wash?
Yes, they essentially cancel each other out.
Did you have an opportunity to consider whether or not there would be an actual difference in cost in terms of constructing a second floor mezzanine within a sprung structure as opposed to constructing one on a pre-engineered steel building?
On the interior features, there shouldn't be a difference. Where the difference would be is that the entire second floor mezzanine structure would fit inside the building enclosure that's already there in the sprung situation, where in the pre-engineered steel situation you had to essentially extend that exterior enclosure up to enclose the mezzanine.
And that additional item you're talking about, is that what you tried to reflect in the numbers you took from the WGD budget?
Correct.
Did you run any of these calculations you did past anyone at Sprung or BLT?
No.
You run any of the calculations you did past anyone at WGD?
No.
And we'll get to some further adjustments, but at any point in this process before August 27th, 2012, did you speak to WGD about the adjustments you had been making and seek their input on them?
No. And there wasn't time at that point, in my perspective.
Other than the lack of time, was there anything else that would have impeded you from
No.
doing that? If the goal of the exercise that you were undertaking was to do an apples-to-apples comparison of a sprung fabric structure to a pre-engineered steel structure, was there any reason, why not have WGD undertake that task earlier in the process?
It perhaps wasn't recognized as a issue at that point. There was again, from a timing point of view, we had pushed WGD to get their numbers to us on the expectation that we would have the sprung numbers at the same time. And then there was a delay in getting the sprung numbers. So, other than that timing issue, we could have gone back to WGD and asked them for further numbers.
Similarly, could you have gone back, if you had the time, to WGD and also asked them to compare the price of a fabric membrane building that was a design build to a fabric membrane building that was a traditional construction, to a pre-engineered steel building that was a design build, to a pre-engineered steel building that was a traditional construction?
We could have done that if we had the time.
Do you think those two things we talked about, one having WGD conduct the apples-to-apples comparison and having them look at other forms of construction for a pre-engineered steel building, do you think that information would have benefited the town?
Yes, more information would be of benefit.
We could go back to the spreadsheet at TOC 202990. Sorry. To TOC 203364. Thank you. If we could focus so we can see the insulated fabric membrane structure box. So, Mr. McNulty, at this point in time, you have received the sprung/BLT detailed budget estimates, and it appears that you have placed some of these into, or placed these numbers into the spreadsheet you created. Is that accurate?
Yes.
When Sprung sent its budget for the arena, it had a budget for an arena without certain options, and that amount was $7,392,000. And then it had options, and if those options were added in, the amount was $7,896,000. Do you know how you landed at the starting point of $7,534,000?
Not at this point in time.
Do you recall if you did any exercise in terms of deciding some options to put in, some options to put out?
I don't recall making any decisions on that myself. I also don't recall getting any direction on that.
Do you recall if when the Sprung and BLT numbers came in, if you understood them to have any form of contingency built into them, like the WGD numbers did?
No. My understanding of those numbers in the BLT estimate would be that's the price for the options that had been specified or selected.
So looking at the BLT Sprung numbers, you have, for site and park development, you have kept the same number as was the case for the pre-engineered steel building. Why did you leave that number the same?
Again, to make an objective comparison.
In the next line down for design fees, permits, and allowances, you've set that at $100,000. How did you arrive at that number?
Because the design fees and anything that would be termed miscellaneous would already be in the total above.
Are you referring to the concept we discussed earlier that when you're dealing with a design build, or turnkey part of the package price is that the consulting and engineering work is baked into the price you're being offered?
That's correct.
I note it does still say design fees on there. In that $100,000, is there any amount that's accounted for a design fee? Do you recall?
Not that I recall.
Do you know why in this case you set a flat figure as opposed to a percentage?
I don't recollect why.
Given the distinction you've pointed out between a traditional construction and design build process, is there anything about that that would lead you to apply a flat fee as opposed to a percentage?
It may have just been for ease of calculation, or maybe I sort of resorted back to, well, what would the building permit fee be, for instance, and what other fees could be expected, as opposed to applying a percentage, which would be traditionally done, but on a traditional style construction project.
And we see the contingency is at 5% still, and you've explained to us why that was a lesser percentage than with respect to the pre-engineered steel. With the fabric membrane structure, there's no optional upgrades or any form of upgrades identified here. Why is that the case?
Because of the nature of the design build project, where the options are the options that are set out in the original spec and agreement, and there's not intended to be the opportunity to make changes from that.
Do you know if any of the recommended upgrades that WGD had identified for a pre-engineered steel building, whether any of those items existed within Sprung or BLT's budgets for a fabric building?
You're speaking of these recommended upgrades in the next box?
Yes.
Those items in the WGD box were relative to taking the pre-eng building to the LEED silver level. The understanding was that the fabric membrane building already met the requirements of the LEED silver level. And so there were no upgrades to do.
I understand that. And my question is more, do you know if, even despite that, whether any of the upgrades that are identified in the pre-engineered steel building were features that would nevertheless be in a sprung building?
No, those items would not need to be, or wouldn't be required to be in the sprung building.
And my question really is, I appreciate they may not have been required to be, but do you know if they were at all?
Looking at that list, none of those options were included in the fabric building.
Do you know if any of those options could have been included in the fabric building to increase a fabrics building's green potential?
Items like subfloor heating, radiant floor heating, a building automation system could have been. Other items like green roof, a cistern and dual plumbing system, structure to support photovoltaics, those would not have been possible on the sprung structure because of the nature of the build.
Do you know, for the items that might have been possible, were you aware of any discussion with Sprung or BLT about whether or not they could be included, and if so, what the cost would be?
No.
We could go to paragraph 396 of the foundation document. So, what we were looking at is you sending Ms. Leonard that spreadsheet with the cost comparisons that you had done to date. Later that day, Ms. Leonard sends you a revised staff report. And if we could open that up, it's TOC 0203551. And I have a couple questions about the staff report. If we could go to page 4. And scroll down. So under the heading operating costs, the report says council is aware that operating a year-round pool facility will increase operational costs. Estimates have been derived based on the average 5-year historical net departmental results from the Centennial Pool operation. And it goes on to provide numbers on operating costs. Other than what's described in this paragraph, do you know how these pool operating costs were generated?
Not specifically.
One of the things that the town sought from WGD is information about operating costs with respect to the arenas. Do you know if that information was ever provided?
Not that I can recall.
Do you have any sense of why that information was not provided?
I think it was based on the timing again, that there maybe wasn't time to put that detail together.
In your view, was operating cost information a piece of information that would be helpful to staff and council in deciding how to proceed?
That would have been helpful.
So if we could go to page 7. And scroll down. And so what we see here is what it appears to be is the tables from the spreadsheet you sent Ms. Leonard earlier this morning. Is that correct?
It looks like it.
And as I believe we discussed earlier today, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was your intention or understanding that this sort of information should be included in the staff report?
Yes, at that point in time.
And just to walk through where we were in the first iteration of the spreadsheet that we looked at, the total cost that you had calculated for a pre-engineered steel building was $10,591,000. In this most recent version of the spreadsheet, the cost is now $11,741,000, and that cost increase, as I understand it, is attributed to the addition of the second floor mezzanine, and then any related increases by calculating contingencies and other percentages on top of that. Is that fair?
Yes.
If you look beneath that table, it discusses how 2 building construction types have been investigated. And then it goes on to say staff also researched the cost of a bricks and mortar building and determined the cost variance between it and the pre-engineered steel building was approximately $550,000 more for the bricks and mortar building. I take it that figure was the figure that was provided to staff by WGD. Is that correct?
That sounds like the number that they had provided.
And when WGD picked that number, and I just want to make sure I have this straight, or identified that number, that was a difference between pre-engineered steel and fabric. This appears to be saying the cost variance between bricks and mortar and pre-engineered steel was $550,000. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know why that was written like this at this point in time?
I wonder if that paragraph may have been in there before we had, if that paragraph might have been in there and was drawn from the WGD report before we had the information from Sprung.
And do you have any understanding of why it suggests that the price difference identified there is as between pre-engineered steel as compared to something being identified as bricks and mortar and not as a fabric membrane?
Actually, as I'm looking at that now and reading it, I don't know where that came from, because a bricks and mortar building in this process was the same as a pre-engineered steel building. So it may have been someone misreading the information from WGD.
We could scroll down. And where the red text is again. This report contains operating costs with respect to the arena. Other than what is set out in this paragraph, do you know how these numbers were determined for potential operating costs for the arena?
Those numbers would have certainly been available in the through finance. I do think I have a recollection that PRC was also doing some work to put together operating costs.
Were you involved in these estimates at all?
No.
Go to paragraph 401 of the foundation document. So this is an email you send after Ms. Leonard sent a version of the staff report, the one we were just looking at, around noon on August 23rd. Send an email at 6 p.m. advising that you were working on another draft, same information but a different approach to the report. You should have it in the morning. Do you recall what you meant by that you were revising the draft to have the same information but a different approach?
To take the information that was already in the draft and reorganize it and word it, I guess, so that it was a readable report. It had the information in the right sections of the report, as far as I would be concerned, and to make it kind of tell a story.
Up until this point, what was your view on how the report had been drafted?
It was bits and pieces of information that had been added to the report by different people at different times, and it was difficult to read and understand what it was saying.
So we then see in the same paragraph that Ms. Almus responds to your email at 6:49 p.m. and asks you whether you would like her to continue or you would like her to work on a couple of recommendation scenarios. And you respond, "I would wait." At this point in time, had you been involved in any discussions about what recommendations were being considered?
No.
Were you aware if those discussions had taken place amongst others?
I was not aware.
Do you know why, at this point, Ms. Almus appeared to be thinking she was going to be working on some recommendations?
Because generally speaking, the clerk or the clerk's department comes up with the specific wording of recommendations, recommendations that are put before council.
Why did you want Ms. Almus to wait on doing that work?
At that point in time, I still didn't know what the recommendations were going to be. And so I think my thought was, let's reorganize this report, get it to succinctly state the information that we have, and based on that, develop recommendations.
So I want to pull up this email chain. It's TOC 0203834. We could scroll down to the bottom. So we see your email at 5:59 p.m. to Ms. Leonard, Mr. Houghton, to the EMC, about your intention to work on another draft. If we scroll up, see Ms. Almus's response at 6:49 p.m. You then respond again to all of the EMC with the "I would wait," as we've discussed. And then Mr. Houghton replies at 7 p.m. saying, "Thanks, Dave, and thanks for our call earlier." Do you know what phone call Mr. Houghton's referring to?
In between that time, I believe I had a phone call with Mr. Houghton.
Was anyone else a participant on the phone call?
No.
What do you recall about that phone call?
I can't remember any details of the conversation.
Remember any of the topics that were discussed?
No, it was, the topic was to do with the report and how to present the information in the report, I suppose.
Was it the case that you and Mr. Houghton were discussing how you would approach the revisions that you were proposing to undertake, to the best of your recollection?
I expect so. The actual telephone conversation, I don't have a recollection of.
Do you recall, and I appreciate you don't have a recollection, is it your understanding, or do you believe that you received directions from Mr. Houghton on that phone call about how to revise the staff report?
I think that
I have a little trouble with that, given the answers that the witness has given to date. It seems like an improper question, quite honestly, given the nature of the answers, which were that I have no recollection of the phone call. I mean, it doesn't make for useful evidence to continue to repeat and press the witness in a situation where he says he doesn't know. The answer you get has every prospect of not being a useful bit of evidence. I'm concerned about that.
Well, what's the question you want to put?
My intention is to ask if Mr. McNulty has any belief as to whether or not he received direction on the call, and then ask the basis of that belief.
He already answered that question.
I'll allow the question. Go ahead.
Do you have any belief whether or not Mr. Houghton provided you any direction on that call about how to approach the revisions of the staff report?
I know that my intention was to take the information that was in the report and reorganize it and make the report more succinct and readable. If the contents of the report changed, then I can surmise that I received some direction to change the contents.
And what leads you to make that? What leads you to surmise in that way?
I wouldn't have come up with it on my own.
We've reviewed with you phone records relating to your cell phone, or showing a cell phone call from Mr. Houghton to you that took place on August 23rd at 6:05 p.m. That lasted for approximately 21 minutes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you believe that is the phone call that is referenced in this email?
Yes.
Do you recall having any other phone discussions with Mr. Houghton on August 23rd?
No.
So if we can scroll up. So this is an email that you sent Mr. Houghton at 7:08 p.m. in which you ask Mr. Houghton, is your thinking that the procurement is done or that we still need to go through the process of an RFP or something? Do you recall why you asked Mr. Houghton the question at this point?
I believe that after our discussion, our telephone discussion, I turned back to the document and started to review what was in it, and realized that that was then an unanswered question. And in order to make the revisions to the document, I wanted to have the answer to that question.
Do you recall if you received a response from Mr. Houghton to that question?
I don't believe I did.
We could go to paragraph 403 of the foundation document. So we see that later that evening at 8:27 p.m., you receive an email from Ms. Leonard copying the other members of the EMC, in which she writes, Dave, I think we have done our due diligence for procurement purposes already. We supplied our wish list to BLT Sprung, and they were aware that they were competing against two other forms of construction. Nobody possesses the Tedlar technology. Nobody else can prove that they have done this type of construction without collapse. Nobody else can provide the lead components in their basic construction. Do you recall receiving this email from Ms. Leonard?
Yes.
Other than receiving this email, did you speak with Ms. Leonard about what she'd written at any point?
I don't believe so.
Do you have any knowledge of why Ms. Leonard sent you this email at this point in time?
I have no direct knowledge. I surmised at the time that there had been a further discussion amongst.
You don't know. This is your speculation, right?
Yes.
So if we can continue on to paragraph 404. This indicates that you circulated then a revised staff report at 11:45 p.m. that evening. So I'm going to walk through some of the revisions that were made to the staff report from the version that Ms. Leonard sent around noon on the 23rd and the version that you sent at 11:45 p.m. Beginning with paragraph 405, you included two recommendations in this version of the staff report. They are that council provide direction to staff on the option of a year-round insulated fabric membrane cover for the existing outdoor pool, and that council provide direction to staff on the preferred approach to the construction of a year-round single pad ice arena in Central Park. What do these recommendations mean?
That based on the information presented in the staff report, staff is asking council to provide further direction. I can tell by the wording in these recommendations that they were not intended to be final recommendations, but sort of placeholders in the report for a more formal version of the recommendation.
When these recommendations were drafted, did you have a sense of what staff was going to finally recommend to council?
Based on the revisions that I had made to the staff report at this point. I think my thought at the time was that those were the likely outcomes that would be taken from the report.
And maybe you can assist me with the first one. What is the outcome there? Is that a recommendation to council to proceed with the fabric membrane over the pool?
Yes, although it has the bit in there about give us direction on, which is a little different than stating that that it's a conclusion.
I can just, direction, there could be different directions, could there not?
There could be.
One of the directions could be to proceed with the project. The other could be get more information.
Right.
With respect to the arena, do you know what the preferred approach was that was being referenced there?
I expect, if I remember the language of the staff report at this time, it was probably towards the fabric arena.
At this time, similar to the pool, was it still open to council to decide what they thought the preferred approach would be?
Yes.
Go down to the next paragraph. This is discussing another revision that was made, which was removing the mention of the use of requests for proposals that had been in the previous versions of the staff report. Why was that removed in this version of the report?
So are you looking at 407?
Sorry, 406.
That was removed as a result of the treasurer's email during the course of that evening.
Other than the treasurer's email, did you have any other discussions with any other member of the EMC before removing that portion of the the staff report?
No.
We could go on to paragraph 408. It says here that regarding the arena, the draft that you circulated did not include any reference to staff investigating a bricks and mortar option. It stated staff is confident on the basis of the research into options for a single pad ice arena in Central Park that the most cost-effective and time-efficient option for construction is an insulated fabric membrane. Why was that language included in this version of the report?
Because I think by that point in the evening, the communications were that was the direction that the staff report was going to take.
What communications are you referring to?
The previous telephone call and email messages.
We've seen the work that WGD did to look into the cost of pre-engineered steel buildings. As far as you were aware at this point in time, had anything else been done to look into what would be the most cost-effective and time-efficient construction material when it came to the single-pad arena?
I'm not aware of anything else.
Do you know if at any point anyone on staff reached out to any company that would manufacture a pre-engineered steel arena to ask them about budget or pricing information?
Directly
Yes.
to a pre-eng steel supplier? I'm not aware of anybody doing that.
Would there have been any limitation in having someone on staff do that sort of research?
There would be no limitation, but we already had WGD taking on that assignment, I thought.
Did you think that WGD and Sprung stood in the same place in terms of what their interests were going forward with respect to potential recreation facilities?
Could you say that again, please?
Certainly. Sprung and BLT are providing budget numbers, presumably part of the purpose in order to have the town agree to build a Sprung structure. Is that fair?
Yes.
Did you see WGD as being in a similar position when it was preparing budget numbers?
No.
Go down to paragraph 409. So what we see here, it references a few things that were removed from the staff report, one of which was the estimate of operating costs. Do you know why those estimates were removed in this version of the staff report?
I don't know exactly.
We also see that the excerpt of your spreadsheet that compared the costs of a pre-engineered steel to a sprung structure, the one we've walked through, that was taken out of this version of the staff report. Do you recall why that was the case?
I think because through the correspondence that evening, that wasn't recommended to be included.
Do you recall who recommended it not be included?
Not specifically.
Was it a decision you made to remove that information?
Don't believe so.
Was it a decision you made to remove the operating cost information?
I don't believe so.
We also see that the design fees and permits allowance of $100,000 and the 5% contingency that we saw in your spreadsheet were removed from this version of the staff report. Was that something you decided to do?
I don't believe so.
The information that's discussed in this paragraph, is that information that you believed should remain in the staff report?
I would have kept it in the staff report.
And why is that?
Because they help to fulfill the whole picture of the of the potential investment.
And can you just explain more what you mean by that?
Certainly the operating costs. The operating costs would be relevant going forward and could be taken as part of the decision. The site and park development costs, that number came, the 1,164,000 number came from the WGD estimates, and in the approach taken, that number certainly could have been reduced in my mind. The contingency, I believe I recall that I had asked whether a contingency could be applied to the project, and at least in the staff report, there was no desire to have a contingency shown.
You recall why there was no desire to have a contingency shown?
Not specifically.
You remember how it was decided that a contingency wouldn't be shown?
Not specifically. There was an ask to have it included, and the ask was denied.
Who made the ask?
I can't remember when specifically, but I believe I asked at some point. And I can't remember who was in the room at the time, but I remember that at least as far as the staff report would go, we wouldn't show a contingency.
Why did you think, why did you make the ask?
Because any project of this nature needs some form of contingency
Why is that?
for the unforeseen.
One of the things that's being contemplated by the staff report is erecting a fabric cover over the pool, which was, a previously used site that had been operational. In your experience, would that have meant that a greater or lesser contingency should have been taken into account?
That would create a larger need for a contingency than a greenfield site, but the arena site wasn't a greenfield site either. It had had many uses over the years.
Just before you go on, Mr. McNulty, did you have any concern about the fact that, and I appreciate you didn't take this out of the estimate, but did you have any concern about the fact that it was only the contingency in relation to the membrane that was being removed, not the contingency that you had included with respect to the prefabricated steel or prefabricated building. It's, in other words, it's not equally done, so there's a 450, the membrane suddenly becomes $435,000 cheaper.
That would have taken some of the objectivity out of the comparison.
Thank you.
I wonder, Your Honor, if it's a good opportunity for a brief break, or I'm happy to continue.
I don't know, it'll take 5 minutes. What I propose to do is finish the direct examination of Mr. McNulty this afternoon and then commence a cross-examination on Monday. Otherwise, I think we'll be here far too late. He's been testifying since 9 o'clock, and I think enough's enough. So carry on. Don't feel pressured or anything like that.
With that in mind, I'd just like to go over a few matters now. If we could pull up TOC 0203891.
Okay, time's up. That's it.
So, Mr. McNulty, we were discussing the revisions to the staff report that you circulated at 11:45 on August 23rd, 2012. This is a copy of the staff report, that version of the staff report itself. If we could go to page 3. And keep scrolling down. Scrolling. So
I'm sorry, I wonder if my friend could just indicate the time again that was circulated?
I think it's around 11:45 p.m.
Thank
on
you.
the evening of August 23rd. This is discussing the costs of proceeding with a fabric membrane for the arena. And it indicates here that for the site servicing, an allowance of $500,000 should be considered in this evaluation. Do you know how that figure was arrived at?
I know that I had some discussions with the engineering manager at the time. Where we came up with some estimates based on experience as to what the site servicing costs could be.
Was that Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
And was $500,000 the amount you and Mr. McDonald estimated?
I don't recall what our estimate actually was, but I think the $500,000 was set as an aggressive target towards what we had estimated. So our estimates were somewhat higher than that.
And the aggressive target you're referring to, how was that set?
In conversation with the CAO and perhaps others, looking at the estimates that we'd arrived at and rationalizing them.
You referenced the CAO and others. Do you know who the others were?
I don't recall who else was in the room.
We see you circulate the staff report on August 23rd and late in the evening. Do you remember how long before that this conversation occurred where the estimates for the site servicing was discussed?
Not specifically, but it had to be within the previous day, just because of the timing.
We see that the site servicing for the pool is set at $200,000. Was that amount arrived at through the same process?
Yes, that's my recollection.
WGD estimated that site servicing for both a fabric structure and a steel structure would cost around $1.1 million. On what basis in your mind could it be done for a fabric structure for $500,000?
Part of the costs built into that $1.1 million was the consideration that it is still a traditional design engineer contract construct project. So the consulting fees, the engineering fees, and all that would be built into that number. As well, at this point, and part of the rationale for putting lower allowances in was that the town was going to undertake some of those site servicing projects or components of the projects in-house, using town staff, using town construction supervisors. So consulting costs would be low, and whatever components could be completed by in-house town staff, that would be the approach taken.
Setting aside the consultant cost that's maybe associated with a traditional construction contract as opposed to a design build, is there any reason why the site servicing at a fabric building would cost less than the site servicing at a pre-engineered steel building?
For the arena specifically,
Yes.
they would, under the same construction process, there's no reason why they would be different.
So am I reading this right? You were going to reduce it to 500,000 regardless of which structure was built. You were just reducing that 1.1. You felt you could, 500 was aggressive, but you felt you could do it for that, but that would be the same for both.
If they were both being done through the same construction process. So if they were both a design build, if the pre-eng steel structure at this point is still an overall project, including all that site servicing. If you isolated the pre-eng building and its contents, the same as the fabric building proposal was isolated to just the building, then yes, the site servicing could have been done for that same aggressive target.
Okay.
Then scroll down. Sorry, scroll up. Scroll up. Apologies, scroll down again. I'm just trying to find a specific number. Keep going. Okay, so looking at the paragraph that says the estimated costs for the supply and construction of the basic insulated fabric membrane arena is 7.476 million as compared to 10.592 for pre-engineered steel. In the previous version of the staff report, the fabric membrane price was 7.534 million, and now it's 7.476. Do you know how that change came about?
No, I don't. I do not recall.
Do you recall if it's a change that you had made?
I apparently made the change in the report, but at this point in time, I don't recall what the basis for that change was.
In the 10.592 million figure we see there, Is that taken from the adjustments that we had walked through earlier today?
In my spreadsheet,
Yes.
I believe so.
And in that case, that 10.592 figure continues to have 1.16 million for site servicing. Is that accurate?
I believe so.
Do you know if there's any consideration at this point in time of reducing the site servicing costs when the calculation of the pre-engineered steel, for the cost of the pre-engineered steel building, given the decisions that had been made with respect to site servicing for a fabric building?
I don't believe there was any consideration of that at this time because there'd been no consideration of taking the pre-eng style building out of the conventional construction model.
Had there been any consideration of adjusting WGD's figures down to reflect the fact that the town could get savings on doing some of the site servicing in-house, even if it had to pay additional amounts for consulting fees?
I don't recall that being a consideration.
So we saw that this version of the staff report was circulated late in the evening on August 23rd. Sarah Almas has testified that the following morning she attended a meeting with the EMC and yourself, the purpose of which was to discuss the staff report. In between that time, Mr. Houghton also had sent a revised version of the report in the morning. Do you recall attending the meeting on August 24th, 2012?
Yes.
What do you recall about that meeting?
It would have been my first opportunity to see the revisions that were subsequently made to the report, and probably everybody's. So I think it was a review and discussion of the changes that had been made to the report.
Did the discussion touch on at all the decision to remove the reference to an RFP from the report that you can recall?
I believe it did.
Do you recall any specifics about that discussion?
Not specifics.
What do you recall, if anything, about that discussion?
I think because that had all happened in the evening of the 23rd, and this was the first time for the whole group to discuss it. I think there was probably a discussion of the rationale to change that language.
Stepping back more broadly, what was your understanding of what the rationale was?
I'm not sure if I understood what the rationale was, other than the direction that I had received the night before through the treasurer's email.
Did you form a view yourself about whether or not this proposal to proceed with Sprung fell within the parameters of the purchasing bylaw?
It would have identified as a sole source procurement at that point under the definition of the bylaw.
Was that your view that this met the definition of sole source procurement under the bylaw?
I believe that was my opinion by that point in time.
And why was that your opinion at that point in time?
Bearing in mind that council could still give further direction on what was being recommended in the report, if they recommended to proceed with the recommendations, that that would become a sole source purchase.
Just so I understand, did you form the view that it was sole source on the basis of what you were told by the treasurer? Or the basis of what you were told in that email?
I believe so.
Thank you.
Do you recall if it was ever raised by anyone whether whether the town could purchase the sprung structure itself by way of sole source, but proceed by way of RFP for the company that constructed the sprung structure?
That was not a discussion at the time.
Are you aware of anything that would have prevented the town from taking that step had they wanted to?
I'm not aware of anything that would have prevented the town to do that. But at least I was still under the understanding that BLT was the preferred erector for the sprung building system in Ontario.
We go to paragraph 413 of the foundation document. So this is an email that Ms. Leonard sent to you and the EMC on August 24th at 10:46 a.m. with the subject line procurement section. Do you recall receiving this email from Ms. Leonard?
Yes.
You remember what the purpose of this email was?
It was, as I recall, it was language to put into the report. To explain the diligence that had been gone through and justify the potential sole source.
The contents of this email was what's described here. Was that the subject matter of any discussion at the meeting that was held that morning, to your recollection?
I don't recall specifically this being discussed, but I see that it was kind of an expansion of the email from the night before to more further explain the points.
The second paragraph discusses element of competition, and it says that element of competition was included in gathering of estimates. The manufacturers of the architectural membrane structure knew that they were in competition with the more traditional forms of construction. WGD architects knew that they were in competition with the architectural membrane structure when producing estimates. Are you aware of what was told to Sprung or BLT about whether or not they were in competition with other traditional forms of construction?
No.
You agree with the statement that WGD architects knew that they were in competition with the architectural membrane structure when preparing their estimates?
They knew that there were other estimates being prepared that their estimate would be compared to. The terminology that they were in competition, in my view, is not correct.
And what's incorrect about that?
WGD and BLT Sprung are not competitors. They're two different types of business. One's an architectural consultant. The other one is a design-build contractor.
We see language along these lines is included in the final version of the staff report. Did you ever discuss with anyone on the EMC why this language had been selected?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall ever raising with anyone that WGD was not a competitor to Sprung or BLT?
Not at the time.
Raise it at any point after the fact?
I don't recall discussing it with anyone.
So if we can scroll down to where it says sole source in this email. So it says, with sole source, it says, again, through our research, it has been determined that there is only one supplier that can meet the specifications staff developed for the facilities. You've already described to us the research that you conducted with respect to whether or not there were other suppliers that could provide this type of facility. Do you have any knowledge about the research other members of staff did or other members of the EMC?
I'm not aware of any other staff's research.
Beneath that, it says, if one of the more traditional forms of construction had been determined to provide the most cost-effective solution, there would have been a further need to issue an RFP for construction, since there are many companies capable of providing this service. Is there any reason why the town could not have decided to conduct an RFP in which Sprung could potentially be a bidder alongside companies that would be offering to manufacture pre-engineered steel buildings?
There would be no reason why not.
Was that something that you recall being discussed?
No.
Is that something that you would view as appropriate in the circumstances?
If you were going to proceed with an RFP, I think that would have to be the structure of the RFP. It would have to consider the same construction process for whatever alternatives you were going to look at.
What do you mean by that?
If what you were wanting to attract was other suppliers that could provide a similarly equipped arena as what was being proposed by Sprung, in order to be able to describe that and then evaluate it, it would have to be the same design-build process as was being proposed for the fabric arena.
So make sure I understand what you're saying is that the RFP would have to be a call for tenders for a design-build process, whether that be design-build fabric or design-build pre-engineered steel.
That's the way I would see it.
Any reasons why there could not be an RFP in which a design-build for a pre-engineered, in which there could be, in which a design-build for pre-engineered steel buildings could be a potential candidate?
I'm sorry, I lost the question.
I'll put it another way. Can you get a pre-engineered steel building in a design-build construction?
Yes.
In your view, would the town have benefited had there been an RFP along the lines of what we've been discussing, one that is seeking a design-build project in which the materials are open to the bidders?
Again, from the point of view of having more fulsome information, that would have been good to have. Based on the research that was done and the work that was provided by WGD, I think there may have still been some challenges in order to make sure that the pre-eng steel building had could attain that lead silver level to be comparable to the fabric building.
Is that a component or a requirement that could have been included in the RFP?
It would have had to have been included.
If we can go to paragraph 418 of the foundation document. So this is describing an email that Mr. Houghton sent to the EMC and yourself at 12:05 on August 24th. And among other changes, Mr. Houghton's revised version reduced the cost of the fabric structure to $7,392,000. Do you know the basis on which that reduction was made?
I don't know.
And then it notes that the cost of the pre-engineered steel arena increased from 11.1 million to 12.3 million. Do you know how that increase came about?
No, I don't.
So if we can jump ahead to paragraph 628. So this paragraph is describing some emails that occurred after the council meeting where it was voted to proceed to Sprung. And one of the questions that was being raised at that point was, how did the figure in the WGD report, which was approximately 7.8 or 7.6 million, we looked at it, become 12.3 million? And in response to that inquiry, you provided Sarah Almus with a spreadsheet showing how those adjustments were made. Do you have a recollection of those events?
Yes.
So if we could open TOC 0218073. So what I would like to do is I would like to compare this to the previous version of the spreadsheet that we were looking at, in which you calculated the cost to be approximately 11.7 million. Just give me a moment. So what I propose to do, Mr. McNulty, is Ms. McGran is going to hand out a hard copy of that earlier version of the spreadsheet we were looking at, so we can keep this one up on the screen. The document ID for this version of the spreadsheet is TOC 203364. So I guess I'll start with this. Does this spreadsheet set out how this town calculated WGD's report to increase from 7.6 million to 12.3 million?
Which spreadsheet?
The one on the screen, sorry. If we could scroll down.
Yes, I believe so.
So, walking through some of the changes that were made from the earlier version we saw, if we could scroll up to the top, we can see now that the top number is 7.632 million as opposed to 6.856 million. It appears to us that this is the result of adding back those two contingency numbers that WGD included in their original cost breakdown. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
And then we can see below that those two contingency numbers are subtracted out lower down in the spreadsheet where it says less contingencies included in WGD building budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
Again, we see that the recommended upgrades are included as they were before. If we continue to scroll down, we can see the second floor mezzanine amount as we saw before, including the upgrade insulation, which is blank. Then we see the site and park development costs. At this point in time, had there been any further discussion about, or any discussion about reducing the site and park development costs to reflect any efficiencies that could be achieved if the town did them in-house?
Not that I'm aware of.
Of this $1.16 million figure, do you have any sense of how much of that would represent consulting and engineering fees?
Industry standard would say probably on site works, probably something like 10%.
We can scroll down. It then adds a design fees, design fees, permits, and miscellaneous. This number has increased from 5% on August 23rd, 2012, in the earlier version of the spreadsheet to 10%. Do you know why that increase was made?
I don't know why.
Do you recall if you made the decision to increase that percentage?
I don't recall.
And then there's the 10% contingency that was there before, although in this case, that 10% contingency is calculated on after the 10% for design fees has been added to the total. Do you know why that contingencies so that 10% is applied to the total cost plus design fees, permits, and miscellaneous?
It doesn't. It doesn't strike me as being unreasonable to put a contingency on those items. But if it was changed over the course of the development, then I don't understand why. I don't know why.
If we could continue scrolling down, We also see that included in the document you provided, Ms. Almus, was the breakdown of how you calculated the second floor mezzanine. Is that correct?
Yes.
If we scroll up back to the bottom line on the first page, I take it then that the adjustments we looked at between August 23rd, a spreadsheet, which is the one that's in front of you, and this spreadsheet, these adjustments explain how the pre-engineered steel costs increased from 11.741 million to 12.3 million. Is that correct?
I believe so.
We could go back to paragraph 628 of the foundation document. And if we can scroll down, so in paragraph 629, you are responding to a request from Ms. Almus about providing information about how the $12.3 million figure was arrived at. And you say, please see the attached files, which include WGD's report and proposed layouts for a pre-eng steel arena, as well as the building budget from WGD and our own spreadsheet showing the development of the budget numbers provided from WGD to those depicted in the staff report EMC 2012-1. Continue down. And then you say, not sure if we need to provide all of it in order to satisfy the request. Note that the reference column on the second page of our spreadsheet indicates the source of the second floor mezzanine / lounge estimate, either from WGD budget formatted in that format or the sprung budget formatted in that format. We may or may not want to remove this column or page. Do you recall why you suggested that second page or the column setting out where the numbers were from was something that may or may not want to be included in response to a request for how that $12.3 million figure was arrived at?
I think it was just a thought that whether it was more information than it would take to satisfy the request, and whether or not it might lead to more confusion as opposed to clarify and answer the question.
Was there anything about that information that you felt had any sensitivity?
I don't believe so.
A few more questions about the final version of the staff report. So if we could pull that up, it's CJI 6146. So if we could go to what is page 68 on the bottom numbering of the documents. I'm not sure which page it is in the document. If you scroll down, you can see. There we go. So this is in the final version of the staff report that was sent to council on August 24th, 2012. And this first paragraph here says, there were two types of construction investigated to provide a single-pad arena in Central Park. Certain site improvement costs will be incurred regardless of the type of building constructed. What did you mean by that? Or what was meant by that? Sorry.
I don't recall whether that was in my version of the report or not. But I think that there's two aspects to it. One is that in order to put an arena in Central Park, a baseball diamond had to be displaced. And then secondly, improvements such as parking lot and lighting and sewer and water and electricity services.
And so for that second category, those are the costs that were estimated to be $500,000 for the fabric structure and 1.16 for the steel structure?
I think so.
If we could continue on to the next page. And we see in the paragraph that says the estimated cost for the supply and construction of the basic insulated architectural membrane is 7.392 as compared to 11.1 to 12.3, and it indicates those are the estimates from WGD. And then if we can continue on to page 70, we see that it sets out a tally of the cost of a single pad arena, which include a total cost for the fabric membrane, cost of certain accessories, and then $500,000 for site servicing. Do you know why it says in this staff report that $500,000 is the same for all options?
I don't know.
Is it your understanding that $500,000 would need to be added to the 12.3 million or the 11.1 to 12.3 million figure that's referenced earlier in the report if someone wanted to understand the total cost of a pre-eng steel building?
No, that my understanding would be that 500,000 would be included in the site servicing cost allowance that was in the other budget.
Do you know if that was explained to council that in that 11.1 to 12.3 million, there was already 1.16 accounted for when it came to site servicing?
I don't know that, no.
So, could scroll back up. Continue scrolling up. Sorry, down. There we go. There's a paragraph there that refers to LEED Silver accreditation. And at the end, it says each of the arenas proposed would qualify for LEED Silver accreditation. In order to receive the accreditation, there would be additional commissioning costs for either building system. A significant difference in the two construction types is that the insulated architectural membrane structure had the LEED requirements built into its basic design, whereas the traditionally industrial pre-engineered steel building must be modified to meet the requirements, leading to additional engineering costs and custom components. Do you know if at any point council was advised that the costs of making a pre-engineered structure, LEED Silver equivalent, was included in the $11.1 to $12.3 million figure provided later in the report?
I don't know if they were made aware of that.
In the previous version of the report that we saw, or an earlier version, not the previous, but an earlier one that you drafted, next to the estimate for a pre-engineered steel building, it didn't include the words estimates provided by WGD. Do you know how those words came to be added?
If my recollection is right, those were some of the edits that were made by Mr. Houghton in the morning.
You know why the staff report doesn't mention that the amounts for pre-engineered steel had been adjusted by yourself to make it an apples-to-apples comparison?
No, I don't know why that was not in the report or explained.
You think that is information that could have assisted or benefited council in making its decision?
I guess I'm not sure why it would have, because as we discussed previously, that part of the estimate kind of canceled each other out. And so but going into that type of explanation in the staff report would be too much information for a staff report.
Is there anything that would have, do you think it would have been too much information to note that there just had been adjustments, even if the details of those adjustments were not provided?
No, that would have been fine.
If we could scroll down, staying in the same paragraph. So later in the paragraph, it says the interior space that is provided within the architectural membrane structures allows for the cost-efficient addition of a second floor lounge area with a view of the ice surface. The cost of the second floor improvements within the architectural membrane arena is included in the above estimate, whereas a similar addition to the pre-engineered steel arena would add up to $1 million to the investment. You see that there?
Yes.
Do you know how this language was added to the staff report?
I don't recall specifically when it showed up in the staff report.
Do you recall if you ever had a concern that that language there might suggest to a reader that that $1 million would need to be added on top of the 11.1 to 12.3 range that had already been set out?
I don't recall having that concern, but I'm not sure that I digested what it was saying to that extent in the short time frame.
And in any event, that $1 million is already within that 11.1 to 12.3 million dollars. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you have any involvement in the negotiation or the signing of the contract with BLT?
No.
Do you have any knowledge about how the payment schedule in that contract was arrived at?
No.
Do you know what was done by the town to negotiate the price of the contract with BLT?
No.
We can go to paragraph 675 of the foundation document. So this paragraph describes that on September 7th, 2012, Richard Dabras of WGD emailed Marta Proctor and identifying a couple of issues with how WGD's work was used in the staff report. Do you recall that Mr. Dabras of WGD reached out to Ms. Proctor to complain?
Yes.
What was your reaction to that?
I think Mr. McNaldy's already acknowledged he didn't see them as being in the station. The statement that they were in competition was not correct. I don't know that we need to go over it.
Okay. If we could go to paragraph 62 of summary document 2.4. And Your Honor, for your benefit, I'm on the last topic of substance.
Well, if I can help you further, I will.
I'm sure you will. So, Mr. McNulty, in the interest of summarizing this, in October 2012, certain members of the PRC Advisory Committee obtained a copy of the WGD report and began asking questions about it and what it contained. If we can scroll down, Councillor West forwarded this on to Mr. Houghton. Continue going down, and then staying on paragraph 64, Mr. Houghton wrote you and said, Dave, this is what WG architects said when they compared the steel fabricated building to sprung structure. Can you help with the errors in their comments? Once again, this is time sensitive. At this point in time, was there any errors in the WGD report that you were aware of?
None that come to mind unless they still had a misconception of the fabric structure.
And what do you mean by misconception of the fabric structure?
I mean, specifically understanding what the construction of the sprung building was like. But in terms of, and so on that basis, did they understand the energy use, for instance, of that type of building totally? I may have had question, but was there errors? I wouldn't have said so.
Do you know what Mr. Houghton was referring to when he speaks about errors in this email?
Not at this time.
So if we can continue to paragraphs 66 and 67. This describes the fact that on October 7th, 2 days later, you sent Mr. Houghton an email saying about a memo that you had prepared with respect to the WGD report, and you attached the memo and a few other items. And if we scroll down, you then continue to communicate with Mr. Houghton and asking him whether there's additional points that should be addressed. Please let you know, and you'll review. And then if we scroll down further, there's a further conversation between you and Mr. Houghton about the WGD report, and continue going on. Then we see that at 8 p.m. on October 7th, Mr. Houghton provides you 2 comments on the draft memo you prepared. And then finally, if we can go to paragraph 71, we see that you send Mr. Houghton a revised memo. Appreciating we moved that through fairly quickly, do you recall if Mr. Houghton made any other comments, corrections to the memo you prepared other than the 2 that were identified in the earlier email?
I don't have any recollection of that.
If we can pull up the memo itself, it's TOC 0600197. So if we could go down to the bottom of the first page. First of all, do you recall drafting this memo?
Yes.
Do you remember what its purpose was?
I think to respond to the questions that had been raised in the community.
Okay. What questions?
The ones that we saw just earlier, I think it led out with, it came from members of the PRCAC.
Yep. If we could scroll down to the next page. So, in this paragraph, you write, in order to provide a realistic comparison between the proposed sprung arena and a pre-engineered steel facility, the options that were provided to WGD to improve the energy efficiency and bring the proposed arena to a LEED Silver equivalent were included in the project budget. It goes on, the sprung facility would be provided with that level of qualification and also included a second floor mezzanine and lounge area that was also added into the basic budget provided by WGD. And then you say the estimated cost reduction of the $500,000 for a fabric structure that WGD architects provided at the end of the report would have been baseless, as it was not for an insulated architectural membrane system. It has no relevance to the comparison. What do you mean by that?
I think that all along and up till the end, I'm not sure that WGD had a clear understanding of the sprung structure or the and the features of it. I had and their cost estimate, I don't believe, was specifically on that type of structure. And so I think that I had some question in my mind of the validity of their estimate based on not knowing how they developed the number, and my feeling at the time that they were still looking at the wrong type of fabric building.
Did you ever discuss the concerns you had with WGD?
I don't believe so.
Is there a reason you did not?
Time and effort, there was no immediate need to have that conversation.
Why was there no immediate need?
Because this was some time after council had seen the final staff report. Am I correct?
This memo, yes.
Yes. So after council had processed that staff report and made its recommendations, there was no need, other than a housekeeping thing, to go back to WGD to clarify information.
Looking now at the time period before August 27th, 2012, other than the time pressure, was there anything else that was preventing you from going back to WGD and expressing any concerns you might have about how they priced the fabric structure they had in their report?
There was nothing that would have restricted me to do that other than the timing of the whole thing.
Looking back at the sentence we're looking at with respect to the cost reduction of $500,000 being baseless if it was not for an insulated architectural membrane system, we saw earlier that the initial WGD report said that a fabric structure would not be insulated, and that the revised report then did refer to the fact that insulation would be included in the fabric structure. Is that correct?
My recollection is it said it could be, yes.
And was it your understanding then that the numbers that WGD provided to you in that final report was their estimated cost for an insulated fabric structure?
I'm not sure that I came to that conclusion, because the information that they provided on the fabric structure was, as far as I recall, was the one line with the price.
If we look at the next paragraph, this is discussing something we spoke about earlier, which deals with the thermal bridging as it comes with respect to the aluminum supports of the sprung structure. And you say that WGD was cautious with regard to the thermal bridging opportunity and each of the aluminum support frames that form the structure for the insulated architectural membrane structure. We had already addressed this question with sprung, and the explanation that was provided was satisfactory. It then goes on to talk about the spacing of the extrusions, which we've discussed, and then it also goes on to explain that there are thermal caps affixed on the outside of the frames to help reduce the effect of the potential bridge that exists at each extrusion. Is that the explanation that sprung provided with respect to the risk of thermal bridging?
Yes, that's essentially the explanation provided by Sprung.
Was there anything else that Sprung said to your recollection about the potential for thermal bridging in the aluminum extrusions?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall if you took the information that Sprung had provided to you and provided it to WGD for their assessment?
I don't believe I did.
The next paragraph says, it was suggested in the WGD report that accurate energy modeling that compared the insulated architectural membrane structure to other construction methods could be performed. And then you say a published third-party comparison copy attached has already been performed on actual operating facilities, which is arguably more reliable than a theoretical model. I just want to step back. Was it your understanding that WGD could have done energy modeling, but was not instructed to do so?
That's correct.
Do you know why they were not instructed to do so?
There was no time for that kind of investigation, and that would be a significant undertaking. I think there was a second part to the question. Was there a why or something?
The question was, why was WGD not instructed to undertake energy modeling?
I don't think that we had any reason in front of us to justify taking that step.
You said it would be a significant undertaking. Are you talking about time? Are you talking about cost? Are you talking about something else?
Time and cost.
Do you have a sense of what either of those would have been?
Energy modeling, the way that I would interpret this, would be a specialty consultant that would effectively create a model of the building in some sort of a software system and change different parameters and process theoretical energy consumption outputs. If I was going to a consultant today to get something like that, I would think it would be a 6-week project. Like, it's not something that they would be able to do in a couple days. It would take organization and illustration and iterations and so on.
Do you recall if you or anyone on staff discussed what the timelines would be with WGD?
No, I don't believe we did.
And at the risk of stating the obvious, I take it what you get at the end of an energy modeling is an estimate or an indication of which of the two structures would be more energy efficient.
Correct.
In this paragraph, you mentioned that a published third-party comparison has already been performed, and you attach it to the email you sent to Mr. Houghton. So if we could open that up, it's TOC 020126.
There it is.
I don't think that's the correct document ID, but my colleague will find it, and I'll ask you additional questions while we pull that up.
I have what I think is a number for that.
Yep.
Maybe this was the one you gave, TOC 0226261, period 001, period 004. Is that what you gave?
That's not what I gave, so
All right, it may be the one. Give that again if you like. TOC 0226261, period 0001, period 0004.
is this the, thank you for returning the favor. Is this the?
It's about time. I'm late in doing so.
Is this the report that you were referring to in the memorandum?
Can you scroll down?
Certainly.
It looks like what I remember, yes.
We could we'll start with this. Do you remember where you got a copy of this report?
From Sprung, it was either posted on their website or they provided it at some point.
Do you remember if you had a copy of this report before August 27th, 2012?
I would expect so. I don't remember specifically when I got it, but I expect I had it before that.
If you can scroll down to the next page, please. So it's my understanding that, and using this as a reference, that what this report did is compared energy usage at two different worship facilities, one that was a sprung structure and one that was a bricks and mortar structure. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then if you scroll up, keep scrolling up, it provides, underneath executive summary, it provides some information about the two structures. One is a concrete block wood framed R12 insulation gypsum interior finish, and the sprung structure is aluminum frame supported tension membrane with R25 fiberglass blanket insulation. When you're referencing this report as a report that provides some insight on comparing energy uses, why did you think these buildings were comparable to the arena building that the town was contemplating.
I think that in the case of the membrane structure, you would get the same energy performance depending on the specific configuration, but you would get the same energy performance if it was a worship facility or an arena or a pool, although it might be in a different range because of different temperatures and so on. But the energy performance of the structure would be the same.
Would you expect the ice plant in an arena to affect a building's energy performance, or how, or whether or not this would be a viable comparator given that large piece of infrastructure?
You'd have the same ice plant in either arena. And so to me, this component looked at the overall enclosure, not the overall facility in terms of energy performance.
Do you know if Sprung or anyone had ever done any energy comparisons or modelings with respect to any of their arenas?
Whether Sprung had?
Yeah, or anyone that you knew of had done that with a Sprung arena?
Only from this information that was provided by Sprung.
Do you know if anyone at Sprung or anyone at staff took this report and attempted to make any adjustments to account for the fact that the traditional structure here had R12 insulation, any of the other components that might make a pool or arena unique?
No.
One last brief area of questions. If we could go to paragraph 925 of the foundation document. Earlier, we were discussing Mr. McNulty, the decision to not include the Sprung shield in the Sprung structures. This is an email sent by Dave Barrow, and it was sent after an individual in July 2013 cut a hole into the Sprung structure at the pool, what was under construction, and drove a scissor lift into the pool. Is that an event that you're familiar with?
Yes.
In a response to a question from Ron Martin about when and how the decision was made not to include the Sprung shield, Mr. Barrow wrote that the topic was brought up by us to Ed Howden, Marjorie Leonard, and Larry Irwin, and roughly 7 to 8 other city staff members, as well as Sprung and ourselves, that were at this meeting at City Hall way back before the building was being erected. Feel free to take a second to read what else he writes, but my question for you is, you were describing a meeting earlier today in which this topic was discussed. Does it appear to you that Mr. Barrow is describing the same meeting?
No. This is not the meeting I was talking about previously.
The meeting that's discussed here, were you present for it?
I can't remember specifically, but I may have been.
The meeting that you do recall where the Sprung shield was discussed, do you remember who from staff was at that meeting?
Not specifically, but as I mentioned, that meeting was after the contract had been signed, And I didn't understand at that point whether the sprung shield was included in the contract price or excluded. Reading the information, I understand that it was discussed earlier, and could have been on this date. I may have been present. I don't specifically recall it being discussed, but at any rate, by the time, in the interim of time between July 22nd and when I raised the question after the contract was signed, it was not clear to me whether the sprung shield was included or excluded from the contract as it was signed.
So in any event, the discussion around whether to forget about the shield and not construct it because it was too expensive, you weren't part of that discussion at all.
No.
And you really weren't told about that because sometime later you're under the impression that the shield was part of the project.
Correct. I may have been there when the idea of whether it should be included or not was discussed, and what the advantages would be and what the risk would be if it wasn't included. But at that point in time, I did not know whether it was included or not.
Thank you, Mr. McNulty. Those were my questions.
Wow. 10 o'clock on Monday? Oh, just one other thing. Mr. McNulty, don't discuss your evidence with anyone between now and Monday, because it can give rise to the impression that someone's trying to influence your testimony, and it creates a bit of a furor in here if that happens. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we've created our own arts and culture up here from city folk moving up here, and that blended with already the Blue Mountain Foundation of the Arts, which has been going for over 40 years. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, it all sort of naturally came together over this last 10 or 15 years, and that's what we've been writing about in On the Bay, and I've really enjoyed becoming sort of an advocate for how we've grown naturally into a community.
I think another very valuable aspect of the Collingwood site is that it's an hour and a half.
Yes.
Well, it used to be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It used to be an hour and a half.
Well, it's an hour to get out of Toronto.
Right.
So then it's an hour and a half.
It is, truly. Sorry, guys. It's time to go to break. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
In Canada, there are 338 federal ridings, but on October 21st, your focus is on the local race. Get to know the candidates running to be your MP. Watch the local campaign on Rogers TV and online. And on election night, Rogers TV has comprehensive coverage of the local results. Rogers TV, your local focus on the federal election.
Most people living with it don't even know they have it. I'm Alex Lifeson. My family, like many of yours, has dealt with the conditions that cause kidney disease. If you have diabetes, high blood pressure, or a family member with kidney disease, you are at risk. If you are overweight or over 50, you are at risk. And certain ethnic groups are also at higher risk. Please talk to your family doctor and have your kidney function checked regularly.
Colts action on Rogers TV.
When I first moved to Collingwood in '82, it was an hour and a half I could be downtown Toronto, and that was a very positive reinforcement for me because I was from Toronto. I could see my friends, I could go to a hockey game, I could do all the things culturally that weren't available in the north area. But it was that, so even at an hour and a half, 2 hours, it seems to be when economic researchers do positioning, they do circles from the major urban centers.
Absolutely.
And there's a distance that people won't travel, or they will travel, but it's dramatically reduced. So I think the location was a great activity for us. Now, a lot of energies came from our people that moved in, and as you spoke about people in that natural transition, I probably know, I was just thinking, I know almost 30 or 40 people, that's exactly what they did. They started up here, they moved up a little bit older, they got a little bigger place, they got a bigger place, and then when it came to retirement, there was absolutely no discussion.
There was no question.
Yeah. For me, it took a little longer to understand how valuable Collingwood was. I was immersed in the operations, so I didn't see the trees sometimes for the forest or the vice versa. It was a job opportunity to go back to Oshawa, and I was right in the final throes of here's the job, here's the position, here's the salary, and I actually sat in the chair and said, I can't do it. And it was because I knew my daughters loved living in Collingwood. I knew my wife lived in Collingwood, loved it. I loved living in Collingwood. So it was that recognition of what a wonderful place Collingwood is then and is today and is getting even better. Do either one of you have any concerns about the future? Is the future are we going to get too big? Are we going to lose anything in this expansion of our size? Because we are growing dramatically. Not just Collingwood, the region's growing dramatically.
You really got to think region, and not. We tried so hard at On the Bay magazine to not be Collingwood centric in terms of our editorial offerings.
I noticed that.
Thornbury, Creemore, even and Meaford. This is all part of Southern Georgian Bay, but. Peter, there is another demographic that people are only now awakening to that's going to build out the population base even more than our generation has. And that's every one of those 40 people that you know who transitioned that way, half of them have kids that are now in their 30s and who don't want to climb the corporate ladder in Toronto, don't want to live the life of a Torontonian, and are weekending, and then all of a sudden you don't have to be at the office any longer.
No.
So there's a whole new thing. So people, the definition of a weekend has changed. It's no longer just Friday and Saturday. You have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Mondayers. You have midweekers and then to go back to go to theater on the weekend. It's all changing, and this new demographic who want to live in downtown Collingwood and have their kids walk to school That's a whole new demographic. That wasn't us, because we didn't move into downtown Collingwood, at least most of the skiers didn't.
Right.
We had our place outside at Cranberry or a chalet or a farm up in the hills. And so this is a whole different migration that's happening right now. And you say, well, where's the work up here? Because we no longer have the industry. The work is that this has become the entrepreneurial capital of the country. And the reason is because of those kids in their 30s and 40s. They have to start a business.
Dr. Foote did profess this.
Yeah.
He said that quality of life will be the rationale for people to locate in different places. So, and it was hard for me to believe that people would turn down double income jobs for a better quality of life. But truly, he was right. People want better lifestyles.
They do, but remember too that some of those people are having their cake and eating it too.
They are,
because they've got a big salary in Toronto, and they've got enough freedom that they can be up here a lot of the week. And I know some of them, including my son, who spends as much time up here as he can, and he runs a big ad agency in Toronto. So, and what does he want to do long term? He wants to be here. So we actually created a term for that demographic, and we wrote about it in the magazine about 10 years ago. And they're called NATS, N-A-T-S. Mm-hmm. Now, there would be no way you'd guess unless you remember that story, and that was 10 years ago. A NAT is a naturally attracted 30-something. So a naturally attracted 30-somethings are people that they're not retiring, but they're attracted by that lifestyle. So we put that up. I've written to David Foote and given him that term that he can feel free to use where else it exists. But he says, it doesn't exist that many places.
David Foote truly was brilliant. He foresaw that women's hockey, which was almost non-existent when he wrote his document, was going to be the savior of arenas in Ontario, because the women's hockey was going to grow exponentially and the male-dominated sport was going to reduce dramatically. And today is exactly that situation has occurred.
He made one mistake, though, and if you were at that conference out on the highway, it was that he predicted that bird watching would become huge.
Yes, he did.
Do you remember that?
Yes, he did. But in defense of David, from a North American position, bird watching is one of the top 5 things people do, which I can't believe. The number one thing in recreation master plans over the last 5 years, which I've been engaged in developing, is single-lane bikes. It's no longer the lawn bowling arenas, the pools, the outdoor exercise, somewhat independent of group functions, but safe. So a lot of people don't want to ride on roads, they want to ride on a single lane on the side or the boulevard. Guys, we got to stop at this point right here, and we're going to be right back after a moment.
It's so inspiring to know that there's people out there that are willing to help people who've gone the situation that I've gone through. Because of United Way, I'm able to stand in front of you today with a good job that I can actually make something of myself.
One of the unique things about First Light is the fact that we light the site by candlelight, which makes it really unique. We're rated as one of the top 100 festivals and events across the province for that reason. And I think the fact that it's done by candlelight as opposed to electric light really sets us apart. We have many, many Francophone First Nation entertainers, so that really speaks to the rich fabric and culture. we really feel that we capture that spirit of the cultural significance of what happens here at Ste. Marie, what happens throughout the Christmas season, and really gives, I think, visitors, the opportunity to look back on the cultural roots of the province. And it's something that you can't experience anywhere else in Ontario.
Growing up, I just felt this hatred for myself, and I stopped planning for the future because I didn't think I had one. Without United Way and the generosity of the whole organization, I don't even really know where I'd be.
So one of the last issues I'd like to discuss with you two. Now, this has provided all of us with a spectacular ability to do 5 things at once. So with our phones, we can see dates and projections, and we can buy stock, and we can do almost anything off these things. Do you see any challenges or dangers in the future about the focus? Because our arts, culture, and heritage is about people getting together in social aspects. And I sometimes worry about the phone diminishing the desire of younger folks wanting to get together because they can almost do everything from their phone. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's the story of you're sitting there and you look over in the restaurant and there's a table full of kids all on their phones and they're talking to each other on the phone. I mean, that's, it really breaks down the interpersonal relationship.
Yes, and from a educator point of view, I see that all the time. It's almost like I'm putting a capital punishment forward by saying, take all your phones and put them on your desk and turn them off. You can almost hear the gasping going through the room. It's because they're so used to that. So I'm just a little bit concerned that the predominance of this screen and the screen time from 2004 has gone like this, exponentially up. Screen time from TV, laptop, and has gone dramatically up. At the same time, the social problems of emotional aspects of that same group has also driven upwards the same way. So I'm just wondering if there's things in our lifetime that we've seen grow and be positive. Is there a worry that the cell phone might interact in a negative way with arts, culture, and heritage? Will people want to watch the phone instead of going to the live performance at the station to see jazz? Will they do their research here versus reading your magazine? Well, what impact is there, or we don't have a handle on it?
I think there is a huge impact, and I think that we have to differentiate direct communication, texting, emailing, from social media. And I think that they're very different. And I think that where the problem lies is in the preoccupation of social media. The amount of time that the gazillions of people who are on Facebook, who are literally using Facebook all day to try and track their friends or to track what's going on, to Twitter madness and to other ways that social media uses up time, because that's not direct communication with people.
I agree.
That's an intermediary. Whereas at least I'm probably in better touch with my kids who live in London, England, Bangkok, LA, and Toronto by email, by FaceTime. FaceTime's a great positive thing because it allows people who can't be together to actually see, almost, sense each other much better. But the social media where they're using another device to interact like Facebook, to me, that is a real worry, and I can only hope that, as we've heard some people say, I'm off Facebook, I'm out of that, either for security reasons or because I don't want to live my life that way. I'm hoping that it'll be a fad. What will replace it, we don't know. But I think on the other side, on texting, for instance, was big in Europe 10, 15 years ago. It only came here in the last 10 years where people, and only more recently where people are texting. I think that kind of quick, direct communication with people that you're going to be seeing by the end of the day is fine. My problem is social media per se.
I have a box of telephones that I've kept from my career, and it's a big box, and they go way back to the 80s when those big, almost army-looking handsets with the big antennas that weighed about 15 pounds apiece, and you had to have a special
and the battery pack that was
yeah. So I had all those, and I take them and put them on the table to these new millennials, and I said, okay, let's guess the years of all this stuff. And they're just befounded to look at this stuff and go, I saw that on TV once. You know, the big ones?
Yeah.
And the different little teeny phones, they went into a small phone aspect with a flip, and then they've gotten bigger again. So you can see the evolution of this communication device, and it's huge.
Yes.
Guys, it's been really great and interesting. I thank you so much for the information you've helped us with, and I'm sure we left a lot of crumbs that people can take by research aspect and go and find out about Frank's background or what Frank talked about this or Jeffrey's positions and things. The final question for you, Jeff, and I don't mean it to be a difficult one, but we haven't talked about your combination of taking editing and business together to do your current position. So it's an interesting relationship. I mean,
you mean the new general manager of the radio station?
It's very interesting. I mean, I became aware of that because I always listened to that station.
Right.
Because as I grew older, I would have different stations for different things I did in my life. So there was a country and western station when I was going to be doing something of one side, and then there was the classical music side that I discovered, and I said, now I always listen to classical music on the discs and on the records, but I never listened to it as much as I do currently, and it's not a promotion for you. I'm just saying it's an interesting combination that you're an editor, but you also now are doing something, managing a radio station.
Well,
so the crossovers.
So one small point, I'm not an editor, I'm a publisher. Now it's important to understand that difference. So a publisher has the responsibility for both the business as well as the spirit of the magazine. If you were doing a theatrical production, it would be the producer. So in a brand new show, the producer hires the director. He's kind of the business and the spirit of the venture, and so that's what I'm doing with the radio station. I'm playing the role of a producer. I am thinking through how could this radio station be better. Well, we've got 16 years of great content in On the Bay. What if we took all the historical inside back cover looking backs and asked Janet to rewrite them for radio? You write very differently for radio, and it has to be obviously much shorter. And so we've repurposed editorial excerpts from the magazine onto radio and then sold them to sponsors who would sponsor looking back, sponsor history notes.
Great move.
And we've done that with maybe 5 or 6 things in the magazine, including Grassroots Heroes and other aspects where it's genuine editorial repurposed for radio and sold not as advertisements, but of sponsored editorial spots on the radio.
Part of the quality of life.
Yeah. So it's just it's actually quite a natural combination. We're both local media. We now broadcast. One little bragging point. We're the first local radio station to broadcast to all of Ontario.
Yes.
So we're right from Kingston to Hamilton. Bill Anderson on his 10 to 3 show is talking to everybody in Ontario.
Well, there's people around the world he's talking to because with the event of the computer,
that's true.
He was talking to somebody from Havana and somebody from Australia, and it's just interesting to hear. Oh, I'm calling in from. Oh, that's I'm listening to you, and I'm in Vienna. Wow. Thank you, Frank, very much for sharing your stuff with me today, and thank you for all the work you've done in this community to date. It's been a big step forward. And Jeff, same thing. You guys have brought in things to improve, and that's what it's all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media. This is Rogers TV, Collingwood.
Tooth fairy?
No, my dear, I'm the pill fairy.
There's a pill fairy?
Well, obviously you'd need one. What's this?
Those are for my back.
Well, you seem fine now. Let's just get rid of any dangerous leftovers, huh? Think about our fishy friends, huh? Ooh, I gotta go. I'm just gonna bring these back to the drugstore. Just don't make me come back.
The pill fairy doesn't exist. Return your meds to the drugstore.
This is Rogers TV, Collingwood.